Hey, Mom. Mom. I'm never gonna get married, okay? I probably live out in the city. No, I probably live out here. But I'll have a job. If I have a job, I get my money. So if I get my money, I can build a log cabin, another log cabin for one person.
Oh yeah.
That's gonna be
kids
beautiful.
if we get married.
Preston loved life. He loved to enjoy it to its fullest, except he wouldn't go to extreme and get himself hurt. He just enjoyed doing things with his friends. He loved laughing. He loved sports. He was good at sports.
He was very physical. He loved to jump and run, and he was always bouncing a ball or doing something. He had these gorgeous eyes that just seemed to light up a room when he smiled, and we were just very proud of him. He was very nice, kind.
He was at that age where he started liking girls a lot too. And him and his friends were enjoying just being teenagers.
Preston was probably the typical big brother to his sister Tamika. They were close when they were little, but as they grew older, they were typical brother and sister, and they were always getting on each other's nerves. And
he tried to be the best at everything, which he tried to say how much better he was at typically everything than I was. So we'd be competing a lot, whether it was from dancing to singing to whatever, basketball, sports, which it was guaranteed that he was better at those than me, but very competitive growing up.
he loved his little sister Deanna also, and he was very close to her, and he would take her everywhere with him and carry her on his shoulders, and he was always there when she fell and always the first one to pick her up.
I loved him very much. He was just there for me, and he played with me when I didn't have anybody to play with, and he would push me on the swings. And
Yeah, when school let out, we knew he'd be coming up that driveway, and the house would become pretty lively when he come through the door. He had a big smile.
I had a real special place in my heart for my son. Before he died, he was just going through a rebellious stage, I guess. I mean, he never did anything bad, but he just would get on my nerves a lot and do things to annoy me, and our relationship wasn't as close as I would have wished it had been.
As we were rebuilding his motorcycle out in the shop, we were spending time together because we had to, and it gave us time to reflect on our relationship from the very beginning till this time, and for me to explain to him that that as a father, that I enjoyed being with him. I enjoyed building this motorcycle and finding out what's going on in his life. And but on the same token, he had to understand where his mom and I were too, and why we had to have certain rules in our family to all enjoy each other and live here. I would come home from some of the bad calls we'd have, whether fire or the emergency medical calls where we went on ambulance calls, especially if there was young kids involved, teenagers involved, or alcohol involved. I'd always tell the kids that night when we sit down for dinner, I would explain to them what I had to do that day, and not to gross them out, but to let them know that it's a for real problem, and drinking and driving causes a lot of deaths. And my wife and I talked a lot of times about calls I went on, and she said, how can their families cope with losing their child? And I'd tell her that I wasn't sure, but I knew it was pretty tough telling someone that their child had died. And we never thought that it would be us in that situation.
Preston always came home when he was told, and he never gotten into any trouble before, so we never even suspected, that this was an activity that he would do.
He knew that he should not be drinking and driving. And this night he wasn't driving, he was just a passenger. But still, he knew he wasn't supposed to be in that car that night. He was supposed to be at his friend's house, sleeping. My wife and I were in bed, and the siren went off. And I didn't move. I just felt sick. I just felt like I didn't want to go on this call. And then I decided I guess I better. By the time I got in the car, I could hear the ambulance leaving the fire department.
When we arrived on scene, there was a vehicle rolled over on its top. Obviously been rolled several times.
And it was obvious that the Subaru had flown through the air for at least approximately 60 to 80 feet, shearing off a tree at least 15 feet above the ground and landing on its top.
And we pulled up to the accident scene. The ambulances were there. There was some other vehicles there. And I headed to work on the patients, which I usually do. As I came toward the ambulance, I started looking around for patients, and the first person I saw was laying off the edge of the pavement in the ditch, and it was my son. I looked up at the ambulance, and I saw one of the EMTs is also a nurse in the back of the ambulance. And I just said, Steve. And he turned around and he says, yeah, what do you want me to do? And I said, it's Preston. I said, he's hurt bad, Steve. And Steve said, anything I could do, Ed?
I said, Ed, let's get him into the ambulance and let's get going.
And there was 3 EMTs and Ed crawled into the back of the ambulance, and we headed for town.
And Preston was semi-conscious, and he was in pain, and he was kind of struggling a little bit. And we were trying to get him to hold still so we could work on him better. And so I got by Preston's head, and I said, Preston, this is Dad. I said, I love you. We need to pray. Preston, we're going to do everything we can for you. And we started working on him. Preston was holding still.
Immediately we were trying to suction him, but Preston's teeth were clenched, and so he was vomiting, and vomit was coming through his nostrils. Ed was trying to suction him. I was trying to open his airway.
Then all of a sudden, Preston quit moving. And it got kind of quiet for just a couple of seconds, and I realized Preston wasn't breathing anymore. So I hollered for help, and I started doing CPR on my son. And I looked down at my hands and saw my son's blood on my hands. Next thing I knew, the doors flew open in the ambulance, and I couldn't do any more. I did everything I could.
On the way into the ER, I remember yelling at the top of my lungs that it was a code blue. They had no idea that we were coming in with one.
We continued working on Preston to where we defibrillated or we shocked Preston.
Where?
We did get Preston's heart rate back. We got a blood pressure back. And the decision was made to immediately transport him up to the surgical suite. Once we entered the OR, Preston was transported over onto the OR table, and due to the complications of the severity of his injuries, Preston did not make it through surgery.
I started thinking, how am I going to tell his mother? How am I going to tell his sisters? Because the dad's supposed to take care of their family. It just seemed like an eternity before Robin showed up with her girlfriend. And when she walked through those doors and saw me and saw my face.
Ed was crying, and he had this desperate look on his face, and I just had this horrible feeling come over me, and I just felt, at that moment, I was just in shock. I couldn't even comprehend what was happening, as far as I couldn't even consider the fact that my son could possibly die. I just never thought that could ever happen. I saw the surgeon, he was walking toward us down the hall, and when he came up to us, he rubbed the back of his neck like this, and when he did that, I knew my son was gone. I just couldn't believe it, that Preston was gone.
When I stood there and I listened to the doctor tell Ed that Preston hadn't made it, I can't even begin to tell you how horrible of a feeling that is.
And then I asked to see him one last time, and he was just so cold and gray, and it just, Mike Preston wasn't there. It just wasn't Preston. I just, he was just alive a few hours ago. I just saw him running down our driveway. How could that be my son? I just couldn't believe it.
I walked downstairs to the waiting room. There was a lot of young people in that waiting room, a lot of friends of Preston and friends of the other young men that were in that car. I mean, the waiting room was pretty crowded, and all I could do is look at them and say, Preston's dead. When are you going to learn not to drink and drive?
After that night, there was obviously a lot of questions asked, and there was an investigation, and they were trying to track down how the boys bought the beer, how they had gotten it.
We talked to some people, and we were told that one of the EMTs bought some beer for the boys that night.
And at that point in time, naturally everybody was denying having anything to do with it, including myself.
I think my first response was shock and anger at the same time. I mean, I couldn't believe somebody that had been an EMT and a fireman that knew what could happen would purchase alcohol for kids. And I was very angry by that.
I was told After he handed the boys the beer, he said, "Be careful, I don't want to be scraping you off the pavement later on tonight." And little did he know that was exactly what was to happen.
As an EMT, I should have known better. Before the boys had left, I seen that there was 5 kids in the car, and one of them in the back seat was Preston. I knew that was Ed's boy.
If he had only made the decision to call my husband and tell him that my son was in a car and they were trying to get beer, if he had just told my husband that, this accident never would have happened, because my husband would have gotten Preston immediately and brought him home. And but instead he chose to buy the beer for the boys, and this is what resulted of it.
If I could talk to Preston now, boy. I don't know that I know what to say. I think I'd hang on to him and I wouldn't ever let him go. And I'd tell him how sorry I was. How sorry I was that I gave in and bought it for him.
And 1 minute your son's with you, and the next minute you're working on him. The next day his mother and you are sitting in a funeral home making arrangements.
I'm just sitting there in a daze. I can't even believe that I'm here. He handed me a little velvet maroon pouch. Had Preston's earring in it. I am a mother of 2 daughters and a mother of a son, and I miss my son. And I wish he was still here. The pain is so enormous that you can only absorb little bits at a time.
I pray that he's in heaven, and that I hope that I could go there sooner.
We were always fighting with each other, and deep down I knew that he loved me and I loved him, and if he didn't pick on me, I would think that something was wrong, but I never said those words to him, or we never showed any emotion towards each other unless it was a punch or a pinch or something like that. So I would just want him to know that I loved him very much.
After that accident, I couldn't even get near an ambulance for a while, even to check the equipment on it at my job, and I'd start shaking. If we had to do training and do CPR training, I could kneel down to the mannequin and see my son's face. I thought I was through as an EMT and a fireman. I didn't think I was going to be able to get it together.
My career in fire and EMS had come to a screeching halt. I started driving truck. I wanted to be away from the whole world so bad. I wanted to go crawl under my rock and hide.
The speed killed him. The alcohol killed him. Making one wrong decision by those boys that night killed him. The EMT that bought him the alcohol. All these were contributing factors. But it all starts with wrong decisions. And if you make one wrong decision and decide to drink, don't make a second and start driving. Because you could put your friends and family through hell.
I know people say, or they think, that it can't happen to them. And there's a good chance that a lot of you it may not ever happen to. But I can guarantee it's going to happen to one of you. And boy, am I sorry. Because it'll haunt you for the rest of your life.